Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. How are we getting on? So, it's been a couple of weeks now since the public demo for Anthem, and those who tick the appropriate boxes with EA are able to play the game already. I don't know that I'd call it early access, but sort of pre-launch access, something like that. For the rest of us, the game officially comes out on Friday, so I thought it'd be a good opportunity to take a look at what I'm thinking and where my head is with the game, that sort of thing, how I feel about it now I've had a bit of time to digest. And, an opportunity to use a bit of the footage I've got left over, because I've got some cool bits and pieces, so enjoy. So, when this game was first announced, which was, about a year ago now, the whole massive vertical world, big open world with the exosuits and the flying around and stuff struck me as a really cool concept. It looked like a great deal of fun, and I was very interested in what was going on with it. Plus, it's a BioWare game, and the stories and stuff are absolutely legendary, and yeah, I'm very much up for seeing what they had to offer. So, that hasn't really changed since then, despite the fact I've had time to play it, and it's had its ups and downs, as these things always seem to these days. So, I thought we'd take a look at how I feel after having actually played it. So, as I play on PC, and most of my friends play on console, and as they tend towards different sorts of games to me as well, I tend to end up playing single player, and quite clearly this game is not a single player game. It's built around multiplayer, that's the space it wants to exist in, so attempting to play it as more or less of a solo player is possibly madness, but obviously the big question from my point of view is, this thing that looks fun, will it work the way I want to play it? So obviously it's not designed that way, that's not the intention, but with a certain amount of care and thought and approaching it from a perhaps a slightly different mindset than the game intended, then yeah, you can kind of pull it off. Obviously that's kind of limited in some areas. You've got content like the strongholds, which are entirely group focused. You cannot do those alone, although the game does contain matchmaking, so you can take those on with random groups if you so desire. So you're not completely shut out from that, although you do have to do it multiplayer. And then you've got the upcoming endgame content that they teased a little bit towards the end of the open demo. That unfortunately I didn't get my hands on any of that because left the universe and everything. But those cataclysms, they're calling them, they're describing them as aspirational content. It's endgame content, and it's much tougher, much bigger, and again focused around groups. I get the feeling you can attempt it solo. I'm not 100% sure on that, but I think you're likely to have a very, very tough time of it if you do. That being said, with the right mindset, most of the rest of the game is approachable from a single player point of view. Not easy, but approachable. One of the big vibes I got off it was that, yeah, obviously with this multiplayer as well, it looks like it would be great fun to hang out, blow things up, fly around with a group of mates, and play it multiplayer that way. So if that is somebody's cup of tea, then that's absolutely great, and judging by the current space of video games at the moment and the popular trends, that clearly is a lot of people's cup of tea. So it does look like the game's going to very, very successfully pull that off. As you jump into various activities, they tend to scale in difficulty and the number of mobs you face and the type of them and their levels based on the people who trigger the events or the people who are involved in whatever activity you might be getting into. So when you're looking at things like questing and the main story, stuff like that, it's significantly more isolated type of play, so that works much, much better as a single player. Well, not necessarily better than it does in multiplayer, but it's much more viable for a single player. And based on what I saw in the demo, it's great fun. It's got BioWare storytelling, albeit slightly BioWare light, but still, it's cool. And because of its slightly more isolated nature, it means you can get in there without being influenced too much by other players, and you can therefore do just fine with it. Cool, I thoroughly enjoyed that, which after all is what it's all about. When you get outside of the questing angle, however, you get into, say, free play, then that's a little bit more hit and miss and a little bit more caution required, or a little bit more of a practical, planned approach perhaps. I think the approach primarily there for that sort of thing is to play smart. If you approach things that you're the first person to arrive on, and the challenge, be it a world event or whatever, then scales towards you as a single player, you'll probably do just fine. A few things I did in free play in the demo, that worked absolutely fine. It went really well. I had a lot of fun doing it. Got very, very immersed in it, and time went by quite quickly, to be fair. So that was great fun. But there were other events that are clearly designed more around groups. There were occasions when I came across other players, and those things ended up being very, very difficult. However, by kicking back and approaching things with the right mindset for a solo player, and being a bit more strategic, a bit more tactical, having an escape route plan so you can get out and then get back in again if you want to, or when you're ready, when you've recovered, that sort of thing works well. And I think the whole thing would probably have gone a little bit better if I'd had more time with the game, I was a little more familiar with it, because there's certain mechanics, certain controls, things like that I hadn't got my head around, and that certainly added to the challenge. The ability to avoid situations that were getting a little hairy would have made life a lot easier for me, I think. But that option is in the game and was in the game, but being new to it and unfamiliar with it, I wasn't that well up on that sort of thing, and it made my life more difficult. So embracing that will add to the fun and add to your ability to tackle it reasonably, I think. So that's something to keep an eye out for if jumping into the game. With the launch both this weekend and certainly around the demo as well, there were a number of issues. But personally, I got away quite lightly, I think. I had a few disconnects in free play that kicked me out and I had to go back in, and at that point I was losing the progress I'd made, which was frustrating. But the build the demo was built from was the game as it was in sort of early January, very early January really. And obviously there's 6-7 weeks more development gone on since that build. So even by the time we were playing it, it was kind of outdated and it was just a small cross-section. So having heard a number of things from BioWare and from other YouTubers who are much more focused on Anthem as their primary interest, it looks like the game's come a long way since then. A lot of its issues have been ironed out. It also looks like BioWare have taken on an awfully large amount, of player feedback, which is good, particularly given that it's a demo, not early access, and the game has yet to release and all that sort of thing. The fact they're taking stuff on already is really cool. And in other areas, they just seem to be well ahead of what people had to say. They knew certain problems were there. They weren't able to tackle it pre-demo, but they were pushing on and making sure that when the launch comes, most of those issues are already sorted. So some of the big things, like particularly on PC, the controls, sensitivities, especially around flight and to a lesser degree combat as well, they needed some work. It was very, very hard. Massive mouse movements were required just to stay in control. And unless you've got a humongous desk, you were going to struggle with that. And since that time, BioWare are already well ahead of the curve and have fixed that, or made big steps to fix that. Part of the issue with the mouse stuff in particular was that they'd scaled for the wrong DPI, or a non-standard DPI rather. So by changing that, that was an instant massive improvement from what BioWare have said. And they've also added further customization options in the controls and settings, so you can tweak things to your liking a lot more. So that should overcome a lot of the issues there. And of course, practice doesn't hurt either. Flying into a few less walls would always be good. I did notice significant improvements when I was playing the Storm rather than the Ranger Javelins. But particularly because it was a much lighter, more manoeuvrable type of Javelin. But that's interesting. It was fun to know that different things have really different vibes. That's cool. It gives a lot more variety and allows you to find a playstyle that suits you more, which is cool. I really enjoyed that. And yeah, in some degrees it offset the issues surrounding the controls, which is obviously not a solution to a problem, because you can't have everybody playing light Javelins and nobody wanting to play the big ones, just because the controls aren't particularly well tuned for it. So it's good that BioWare have put that right. So one of the other big issues that I ran into was that the game is very, very system hungry. I dialed back the settings a little bit and still had difficulty streaming it. Oh, I think I can probably work around that now. I've got a few ideas on that front. But it did cause a couple of issues. I don't imagine that's going to have changed any with the live game. I'll imagine that's much the same position it always was. That being said, with a couple of tweaks, if it can work, that will be cool. The other side, of course, being when not streaming it, just playing it for myself, Obviously, I haven't got the extra demands on my PC. I'm not running really intensive software alongside a really intensive piece of software in the game. So that should be a lot more viable, which is cool. And hopefully they'll smooth out things like the frame rates a bit more as well. They've certainly expressed that they've been working on that. So that should bode well for what the game will be like in full release. I know they're still having a few connection issues. I've read recently that despite the fact it's in pre-release, the game has had issues with people being kicked and things like that. But if their changes to the mechanics around that are up to par with what they've said they're aiming to do, which hopefully they will be, then at the very least the impact of that is going to be significantly mitigated, which is cool. One of the big things that they had changes was when getting kicked from free play, I was losing out on the experience and items gathered and things like that because I hadn't finished the event and I'd been kicked out. So I'd have to try and do the whole thing over again or something similar in the hope of recovering that. What BioWare have done to try and tackle that is basically that if you leave or get kicked or whatever, or something goes wrong, then the game will make sure that you are credited with everything you've done up until the point you depart. Obviously, part of the reason it's structured the way it is so people can't just, get a whole load of rewards, clear off, and just claim the end game or end mission benefits and leave other players in the lurch. A happy medium is what they're going for there, the balance between the two, and based on what they've said, the description of what they've said, it should work. And it also means if something goes wrong, as I say, you won't be losing out in quite the way you were, so that's always good to know. So they've also had other issues with things like sound bugs and broken inscriptions on weapons and gear. That's basically, you've got the weapon's main stats and everything, and then it has bonus effects that are listed underneath, calling those inscriptions. And with quite a few bits and pieces, those were reading at 0% increases, or there was nothing there where there should be, things like that. That just stemmed from the fact it was an early build, these things weren't entirely finalised. And to be honest, I'm not entirely sure you can say such a thing will get finalised. Obviously, balance changes and things like that will happen after launch. It's a live service game, so. But they'll have a complete spectrum of bonuses in place for gear and weapons and such, like by the time launch comes out, or basically by now, I suppose. So that's one thing we know won't be an issue anymore. So, ultimately, what do I think and feel about the game? Well, it would probably be a more complete, more full experience if I could play it multiplayer, but as somebody who will likely, for the most part, play it as a solo player, based on what I've seen and what BioWare have said since, it's going to have a few areas that will be not ideal for me, but I'll be able to get into if I want to, and the rest of the game will be more challenging and require a lot more thought, but it was a hell of a lot of good fun when I played it on the demo, and it stayed in my head, and I've wanted to play more. It left me wanting more. I'm still feeling kind of interested, and yeah, like I want to get this and sink my teeth into it. Is it worth paying full price for a game that is not designed for what I want to do with it? Am I going to get my money's worth out of that? Am I going to have a good enough time to make that worthwhile? I think I will. I think I will probably get enough out of the game to say it was worth the buy. So yeah, I'm feeling pretty positive on that point. On the other hand, it's not going to be 100% what it could be. We'll have to see what happens with the post-launch content as well. Some of that will, I suspect it will follow the current thread, I suspect some of it will work better than others for a solo player, and it's all free, so, or included in the initial launch price, whatever way you want to look at it. So that's always good. And yeah, ultimately, as long as I have a reasonable amount of time with it, and I enjoy that time, then yeah, that's good enough for me, I think. Obviously, if I'm hating every second of it, that will be an entirely different matter, but I don't feel that that's what the result is going to be. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. So yeah, I am looking forward to giving it a go. The other question, of course, is how does that fit into my timescales and my scheduling and basically YouTube as a whole? I don't think it's going to be a big thing. It's going to be maybe something, with the odd stream here and there, maybe once a week tops, something like that. But I think it'll be very, very much a secondary part of what I'm doing. But it's going to be a long-term thing, so it doesn't matter if I'm not charging on from day one. I can take my time more with it, and frankly, I will probably have more success if I do. So, yeah, I think that's basically how I'm feeling on the game. I think I'm going to have a bit of fun with it, enjoy it, we'll see how it goes, and yeah, we'll see. If you guys are playing it, maybe we'll jump in at some point together and see what we can do. But anyway, I hope you found that interesting, informative, and enjoyed a bit of the footage that I had left over as well while we were discussing the game. If you did like the video, do hit those buttons for me, it's always very much appreciated. Social media links popping up as well if you want to catch up with what's going on Facebook or Twitter, or want to see screenshots and things like that I'm sharing from my various gaming exploits over on Instagram. And by all means follow me over on there. And if you'd like to join in and hang out on one of the streams, then do catch up with one of those as well. For now, thank you very much for watching, and I will be speaking to you all very, very soon.